In 2005, I met a girl who seemed to be the perfect fit for me. For the next 2.5 years, we had a relationship with its ups and downs, and eventually, in 2008, we broke up. 2 years later, I discovered that her new boyfriend was found dead of a morphine overdose. To add to the craziness, just 1 week removed, she was again present when a friend was found dead again of a morphine overdose. 2 people found dead within 2 weeks, both with her present. Had they been poisoned? I was glad our relationship had ended when it had. Who knows what could have happened to me? A link to the news article can be found in the video's information. I was at college in Kingston. I shared a room on campus with my buddy from high school, Fraser. Nothing very interesting ever happened to me in life. I come from a modest background in a small Midwest town. Even though Fraser and I were both majoring in different fields, we shared a social sciences class together, and it was in this class that we had a new student. He joined partway through the semester and kept himself to himself, or so we thought. We had tried to say hi to the new student, but he just turned his head away, which struck me as being kinda rude. After a couple of weeks of being in our class, our lecturer, Simon, called my name to get my opinion on a subject. Before I could speak, the new guy answered instead of me. He didn't just cut in, he answered as if he was me, as if my name was his name. I cut him a glance, and he scowled at me. This was so odd. We had a day off midweek for studying in our own time, and I had noticed the guy following me. His name, by the way, was Ryan. Could it have been a coincidence that he was on my trail? I would sit in the library and see him at the far end. I was so sure that I could see him looking at me from the corner of his eyes. Things came to a head shortly after, and I suspected that something was up when he threw a personalized pencil at me. I had been trying to bury my head in books as I had a midterm coming up, when suddenly something struck my cheek, stinging me. Nobody else in the library had noticed, and when I looked up, Ryan was smirking, and then quickly left. When I say I was hit by a personalized pencil, I must explain. Ryan seemed to have had a batch of pencils made up with his name emblazoned on them, as you could have made to order at the college stationery corner. One day passed, and Fraser thought I was blowing things out of proportion by my worrying, until we arrived back at the dorm house in the evening, and there it was on my doorstep. One of Ryan's pencils, just sitting there. I picked it up and looked around. I was pretty sure he hadn't just dropped it by accident, as he was living off campus. He had no reason to be lurking around this part of the grounds, and yet here was the pencil. Fraser shrugged it off and suggested that we get to bed, but I saw it as a bad omen. A shiver went down my back as I slowly turned and surveyed the area. There were 2 or 3 streetlights outside the house, and even so the area was mostly in darkness. Shadows were looming all around. The next day I awoke in a mood. I'd barely slept and couldn't stop thinking about my stalker. Fraser told me that I should do something about it, so I went to see the dean. Ryan was hauled in front of the committee and apparently removed from all lessons. Weeks went by and I didn't think of him again. Classes went perfectly, and I didn't have to look over my shoulder when walking to and fro. At least that's what I thought. Towards the end of the semester, I returned to my room and found signs of forced entry on my outer door. There were chips of paint and pieces of wood on the steps. The door wasn't locked as I entered, and I went upstairs to my room. Again, the same story. Chips of paint and cracked wood littered the floor. I opened my door with caution, to find my books were all over the carpet. My computer was on the floor too. Luckily, it still worked. But there was little doubt in my mind. Ryan was still around. I graduated shortly after, but my memories of the year will always be tainted by Ryan. Let me begin by telling you a thing or two about myself. I was 24 at the time, female, and worked in a supermarket. I'd been working there for a few months, and I was well liked, well, as far as I know. The supermarket had a very strict dress policy, and I would often see people sent home for having the wrong coloured pants or coloured hair, told to return with the correct dress. In the summer I had been getting my feet tattooed, a patterned design from my ankles down to my toes. One thing I didn't think of was to check with my supervisor, as I couldn't wear normal shoes for the week following getting tattooed. I turned up at work wearing flip-flops and was immediately told to leave because of the breach in dress code. Either I was to wear traditional shoes, or I would face disciplinary action. Over the previous year or so, I had been getting slowly tattooed, one by one, and I didn't think about it, as my work clothes covered them up until now. I said no to my supervisor. I had to wear flip-flops just for the week while my feet healed, and I was sent to the office to see the manager. I sat there in the hallway outside the office, my tattooed feet on display. The receptionist shook her head and smiled, tutting at me as if I should have known better. 5 minutes later, I was called into the manager's office and sat in front of him. "Are you familiar with our dress code?" he asked. He came around the table and looked at my bare feet, mostly covered in tattoos. He complimented me on my pretty tattoos, but said it was no good to have them on show. I pulled up my pants and showed him that my tattoos went up my legs as well, and he said it was just as well that my legs were covered up. It was a Tuesday, and this was my first day back at work after being tattooed on Thursday, and so the soles of my feet were getting tough and grubby after being only in flip-flops since then. That's when he offered me a foot rub. He was a large man of maybe 50, and I thought this was a little inappropriate for work. I declined, and he asked me if I liked my job. It was at this point that I realised I didn't know what to do. I joked with him that if I let him give me a foot rub, would he let me get my hands tattooed and not have to cover it up? He smiled and reached for my foot. I looked around, and I was starting to shake. His thumbs were caressing my tough heels, and he asked how many tattoos I had. I answered him that I don't know how many, but I have a lot. He asked to see them, which would mean me basically stripping off for him, and I wasn't about to do that. I stood up and went to leave, leaving one of my flip-flops on his desk. He smiled and calmly said that there was no need to leave yet. He asked again to see my tattoos, asking if I had my tummy tattoo. In truth, I did of course, but I said I didn't. There was no way I wanted to show him anything. I left the office and ran to my car. Wearing one flip-flop, I flapped down the corridor, fighting back the tears. I got to my car and never went back to work there again.